Holiday by August, object storage idea, session on object identifiers and identifiers in general. But maybe we'll split it up in a separate session on identifiers for these objects. So what do we have? Let's say each object definitely has to have an identifier for the file system to work. So what we previously had, like a file name, that's not for the machine anymore. It's like just for us. It's just text. The computer itself has like some sort of technical identifier that you probably won't see, which only has to be valid in the scope of that storage pool, like your drive, your hard disk, your drive, your NAS, or whatever, your cluster. Not globally unique. If we could come up with an identifier that serves both, fine. And let's say that's one identifier that sits under the hood. Another identifier that also is kind of under the hood, but you probably may see every now and then, or maybe not, I don't know, is an object identifier that can be used to refer to the object, maybe in best case for its whole lifetime, regardless of where it traveled. Like this is like I would suggest like timestamp, including time zone, because otherwise you'd have collision, and then maybe some optional string that can either be machine generated or human generated at any, and it can also be edited at any later point in time. The thing is just that probably it makes sense to define the syntax of this persistent object identifier in one way or another. So imagine you have like year, month, date, time, whatever, time zone, and then a string. This is... Now that kind of identifier would probably also be like, please think of it like a file name. Okay, you can have spaces, but maybe not. I don't know yet. But you have this identifier. What for? So I said we have like audio tracks, album, artist. And now you have this artist as a metadata object. And that artist, so we had like Hooverphonic tracks and artist Hooverphonic. Probably makes sense that if I refer to this in my local collection, and for some reason I'm the first one to describe this, so I have this artist here now. We'd call this type of like agent in metadata world. So an agent would be an entity that plays an active role throughout the lifetime of a work. So an agent can be a person, a company, a group, whatever, even a piece of software these days. So you have this artist. Okay, now these files travel to another machine, are being copied, and they refer to an object they don't have. Now it gets a bit fuzzy because we have several use cases and possible solutions that may and shall coexist. One is that I want to be able to point to an object, similar like an IP version 6 address, like outside of my local scope. So I could have one of these tracks, I find one of these out in the wild in 20 years, I'm like, oh, it points to an artist. I know the name of the artist because it's still written in text, like Hooverphonic, but it also points to an object. I'd really be curious if it can find this object. And now, since this is a globally unique identifier, because timestamp and so on and so forth, it's highly unlikely that you'll have any collisions. You'll have this length, but this is even human-readable and manageable. You can like find that object online. Has anyone published this online, openly accessible? And well, since this is an artist that that is public, probably you could resolve that through, for example, WikiData. And now this is what I said, now the use cases are dissolved and you'd have like a linked open data case where the boundaries between the descriptions you make locally and others make, and how you can relate to objects of others across domain boundaries and across institutional or personal boundaries. Just think IP version 6, but a bit less techy, more like, oh yeah, I'm referring to an artist. Come on, I could look it up on the internet, which you actually do. So you have your artist object, and it goes like, oh yeah, you create an object with that ID, you named it Hooverphonic, and now that would be what an application does. It helps you. You could go like, check online if that artist already exists. And it goes like, yeah, Hooverphonic, I found it on WikiData. Do you mean this? And I go like, oh yeah. Then it says, you know what? Others already have created an object with this. Would you like to change your object ID to this? So we're speaking about the same stuff. So you're synchronizing identifiers. And while we're at it, you can say, actually I'd like to have what other identifiers, WikiData or any other database that I'm referring to, can I have that refers to this same entity? So we're basically now, you're blowing up this metadata object, no payload, just relationships, just references, with like identifiers. And this can be a lookup object. So now it has like from several other collection entries like Austrian Mediatek, British Film Institute, GND, DNB, UMB, whatever. There's so many databases who just deal with people, artists, and whatever, with different scopes. And now that data is with your object. We have now gone slightly beyond. You just had that artist in your Clementine or iTunes music application. Because now you get like, okay, Hooverphonic. Hooverphonic's a band. That band consists of these and that members. And now by having these identifiers and external identifiers, you can now, and by having object identifiers that are persistent and maybe accessible if someone shares their pool of objects publicly or through a VPN or whatever, if you can access other objects that it refers to, you can resolve all kinds of information by like going these relationships reference links. It's nothing new, but now you can do this on the file system level. You don't need a fancy catalog for this. You need an application that can do this, yeah, but you also need an application to copy files. The file system doesn't do that. But the file system defines the structure of, if you copy a file, you do it like that if you're speaking to me. So I make sure that we're staying all sane and that your files are still fine, and file names and metadata and so on. So if we have our object file systems and they're interoperable, you can now basically, you can refer to other objects, and you can have identifiers for any kinds of other data collections, which over time, if what I'm suggesting is being implemented, would dissolve to an object-to-object network that basically would draw like a graph-like structure with by name and by reference at will. Sometimes you like more on how do you copy these objects, and this seems pretty heavy, like, so you have this all identifiers. This is getting huge, dude. No, it's not. It's just a few kilobytes of data, but you can now blow your data up in terms of information as crazy as you want to, and you can have more on thin and thick copies of data. But yeah, identifiers, object identifiers, have one with a local scope if it can be that you have one that works as unique and persistent identifier. Awesome. And even if we don't use that and just have the tagging option on the object level pointing to identifiers that others also have access to, well, you basically have linked open data built in by design. How about that?